evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. Here's my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
How you doing, man? What's the latest in the tech world? What's going on out there?
Well, we talked about deepfakes a fair amount the last few weeks, and
Mhm.
they're getting deeper and deeper and
Man,
faker
better,
and
better and
faker.
better, huh?
Yep, as is everything else in AI, which is a
Mhm.
different story. But the remarkable one this week is what happened in Hong Kong. A financial officer at a substantial company that hasn't been identified got a note, joined a Zoom call with his boss and some other people in the company, which he did do. And in that Zoom call, he was told by the chief financial officer of the company to wire $23 million to 5 accounts, which he did.
Mhm.
What was the problem, sir?
I imagine that there was a deep fake that the guy who gave the orders was not real. Is that true?
Absolutely true.
Wow, that's stunning. I know we've
That's
talked
how
before,
good
Dave,
it's getting.
about how AI and the deep fakes and how it's hard to do the video. I mean, this is a deep fake video conference call. Is that what it was?
Yep.
Wow.
Now, I am not good enough to have it that it would convince you, but I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who are.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, you can build a deep fake on a decent gaming PC or Macintosh now. You're starting to get what used to be called large language models
Mm-hmm.
and are now called small large language models, as
Nope.
in
Mm-hmm.
77 billion parameters instead of 70 billion parameters, which is plenty to do the video, that are running just fine on the kind of
So
machine
you don't need
that many of us have.
a supercomputer to put some of this stuff together. Is that what you're telling me? You can do that on a regular high-end PC?
And hundreds of people around the world have been doing it and describing how they do it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, and it's going to be probably this good on the iPhone coming out in September.
Wow.
I've been watching some of the things Apple has been doing,
Mm-hmm.
all this stuff. Uh, this stuff is that good.
That's incredible. That I'm still trying to wrap my head around this high level financial guy at a company going on a conference call with his boss that was a deep fake conference call and giving orders to move $23 million around. And he did it, and it was all a setup. It was all fake. That's astounding.
Well, let's talk about what it would take. And most people are listening to this on the radio, not watching the video. So they wouldn't see what I'm saying right now.
Hmm.
But the way my screen looks is it's got you pictured with an artificial background. It's gotten better and better. I
Hmm.
remember when you first started using it, it had a rough edge, and now it looks like you're sitting in the studio at WHCR FM.
Hmm.
Uh, and I'm in a little window talking away. You can see my mouth moving and occasionally my eyes and my head moving occasionally. That is now something that can straightforwardly be made on any decent PC. This is not they're making my head moving and talking
Hmm.
look realistic is only one object with minimal motion, not moving far in the frame. It's the same way as I say, you're looking at me now, you see my mouth moving, occasionally my eyes and my face shifting, my head shifting a little. Trivial to do.
Mm-hmm.
and to do it that you would fool most people.
Wow. Yeah, I guess when you think about it, Dave, there's not a whole lot of motion there that you got to recreate. You're not out playing sports, you're not dancing, you're not, performing. And it's not even your whole body, it's just your face, your head, and your facial gestures and head motions.
Yeah, and the background is static. You're
Yes.
looking at my bookshelf behind me,
Mm-hmm.
and this can be done easily.
Wow.
And I don't know if it could be done that well that it looks completely natural uh, on a little machine, but it probably could be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Certainly, in fact, I could think of a dozen tricks to make it harder to detect, like turning off the overhead light so there's not so much light on the subject,
Mm-hmm.
which would blur everything.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and all of this is what's possible and being done. In this case, $23 million worth.
Wow.
It first appeared in the Hong Kong press
Mm-hmm.
and picked up by the press around the world as reliable, although they haven't put out the details like which company was involved.
Mm-hmm.
And presumably they're trying to trace down the folks who did it. But last I heard, they haven't caught them.
Wow. That's a whole lot more. Well, maybe I don't know if it's more nefarious, but we've heard a lot about the nudity issues with deepfake, taking famous movie stars and performance stars and putting their face on within a pornographic scene, which is certainly quite nefarious. But it doesn't rise to the level of the financial crime that we just were talking about. That's
Well, I don't know. What would be the market of a pornographic movie of Taylor Swift?
hmm.
Given that, in fact, uh, Twitter was swamped with pornographic deepfakes of Taylor Swift a
Hmm.
few years ago. It got so extreme that you couldn't search for Taylor Swift on Twitter. That was the only they're getting so many there people had no way of coping.
Hmm.
Uh, Washington Post reported that the same thing was happening on Meta, but Meta hasn't fired all their compliance officers and all the people who watch those things. So Meta was able to catch them
Uh-huh.
and make them hard to find, if not completely invisible. But on Twitter, they didn't have the people or the ability to do anything about it.
Right. Thank you, Elon Musk.
Also, from the Washington Post, pointing out that Meta has now said that if they know that something is AI, they are going to mark that on the photo.
Hmm.
And if it's made on their tools, it puts a watermark on there that they can detect. They're talking about doing the same thing at places like Midjourney and Google, but as far as I know, they haven't done that effectively yet.
Hmm.
But so what? There's plenty of software that can do all of this that doesn't come from the big guys, is not censored, and
Hmm.
can easily create, well, the next case on deepfakes.
Hmm.
There's software called something like, well, let me be euphemistic. Uh, Eliminate the clothes of, which you can take a full length photo of anyone with clothes, doesn't even have to be a skimpy bathing suit, and generate a nude. This is actually software available today, I believe, in some of the app stores. It was found
Hmm.
and is being used widely,
So I guess what
including,
it just looks at the body type, the size, the shape of the clothed person, and just uses AI to fill in the blanks, and boom, you're naked.
yep, you've got the skin tone in the part of in the part of the body that's uncovered.
Right.
You have the body shape
Hmm.
from what's covered, and it's trivial now in software, for example, In fact, let's explain how to do it in a way that's being done often and quite well.
Okay.
You now can very easily change the clothing on somebody. And in fact, Amazon has been letting some people, some of their advertisers work with, presumably they're going to have it available throughout, software that can say, show me this t shirt in orange or in black
Mm,
or with the Rosetta Stone
mm.
outlined. I have a t shirt, I'm not wearing it right now,
But
that
they're
has a
showing it
Rosetta
on a
Stone.
particular model. That's the point, right, Dave?
Not on a particular model, on you. You upload a photo and
Wow.
you can see what the clothes look like on
On
you,
you.
and it's
Wow.
pretty realistic.
Okay.
Well, if you can put a copy of the Rosetta Stone or put a copy of the Mona Lisa on somebody's chest, yeah, you can put that same chest on there,
Mm-hmm.
nude. Absolutely doable.
Wow.
Yeah. So you can't believe anything. Another piece of software that I saw coming by this week allows you to add objects, not just to a image, but to a video.
Mm.
So it's very nice. It's the one I saw was showing a revolving turntable with uh, fruit on it, ordinary still life, but in 3D and revolving and showing up from each dimension. Easy to do. And then you typed in add hair upper right. And suddenly, literally suddenly, almost instantly, there was a pair in the upper right of that video.
So what
That
you're saying, Dave, you can take a given video and insert some extraneous new object into the video, and it looks seamlessly as though it is in the video when it was recorded. Is that
now
what
the
it
stuff
does?
the stuff I saw was coming from an experiment. I don't think it's available commercially, but it will be probably in a matter
Hmm.
of months, if
Hmm.
not days. And that's all there. Now, this is not new. By coincidence, I was reading a book by Kai Bird, an author who's very well known because he was the co-author of the book that was the basis of the film Oppenheimer, which we should talk about in a few minutes. Uh, and he grew up. His father was a U.S. consul. It worked in the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem,
Hmm.
East Jerusalem. That and he grew up there, and so he was writing about what it was like in the 1950s and 1960s, where he grew up, East Jerusalem. And he talked about a major incident that had happened, uh, I think, in the 1930s. There was a picture that circulated of a bomb being set off in the Al Aqsa Mosque, the place where Muhammad was understood to have gone to heaven from,
Hmm.
in Jerusalem, a very holy site, and what I understand is a remarkable, beautiful building, but non-Muslims are not welcome there anymore. Uh, Burning, and that photo circulated. It got to Hebron.
This is in the 1930s, right, Dave? That's that.
This
Mm-hmm.
was back then, 20s or 30s,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere before the independence in 48.
Mm-hmm.
And this was, I'm reading the book by Kai Bird about, it's actually his autobiography. He grew up in many interesting places. obvious his father was a U.S. Foreign Service officer,
Hmm.
and in fact, he grew up in East Jerusalem, in the Old City, or
Hmm.
near the Old City. Uh, and I haven't gotten too far into the book, but it seems to be fascinating.
But they circulated a photo of this holy site on fire, and it was fake. Is that what happened?
And the people, the Palestinians in Hebron, retaliated,
Hmm. Wow.
killed 67 people.
How many?
67 people.
Wow. Wow.
And that would, at the same time, you have many Palestinians being killed by the Jews, both in the 30s and in 1948. Uh, I remember my grandfather was an Orthodox rabbi,
Hmm.
deeply committed to Zionism. And when I was a kid, he used to tell stories about how noble our people were. That why the Arabs were shooting prisoners, we Jews saved them, treated their wounds, and so on. And that was the way it was put in. Why were all these refugees there? Well, they left so that the Arab armies could come in and kill all the Jews. And they were just getting out of the way. So why should they be allowed back? Since then, a number of historians, mostly Israeli Jews, have gone back to the records and established things like the massacre at the area Sun, where the Irgun and the Sternbad killed, I don't know how many Arabs in a town not far from Jerusalem, in order to scare the other Arabs away so that the Israeli troops could take the area. And that's absolutely been demonstrated by the Israeli historians
Hmm.
that this was part of the history.
Okay, well, it sounds like, Dave, just to kind of parse what we're talking about here. The first thing you talked about sounds like it was an early version of a deep fake in terms of
Yep.
a false image that was created, put out there to provoke violence. The second thing that you're talking about sounds more like typical propaganda where truth is kind of is distorted and distortions are put out there to manipulate populations one way or the other. Is that am I hearing you
And
right?
that's that particular bit of history. And we now have a bit of history. So the Washington Post is talking about how Taylor Swift is being presented pornographically, and that's a big issue. There are senators who are writing bills to make it illegal to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Got to protect Taylor Smith. And there is a major court case in New Jersey by the family of a teenage girl whose clothes were stripped off by software, and those pictures of her nude were circulated in her high school.
Mm-hmm.
And that's gone to court. It's not clear whether there's any law that affects it,
Mm-hmm.
that prevents it.
Wow.
And that's actually an actual case that the New Jersey Law Journal is
Mm-hmm.
reported. But so we know you cannot believe what you see.
Wow.
We
Where is
started off
where is this going, Dave? I mean, you can't believe your eyes. I mean, used to be we used to say, photos, picture doesn't lie, but you can't say that anymore. You see something and what you see is not real. I mean, I can't imagine where that's going to go in terms of news coverage and politics. I mean, That it's a scary proposition.
And I don't pretend I have any answers whatsoever. I'm bringing it to the news because it's something we all should know about,
Hmm.
and it's going to come up. But the old saying is that the first casualty of any war is the truth.
Hmm.
I think that dates back to World War One,
Hmm.
when there was massive propaganda on both sides, and some things that weren't propaganda. Do you know the story of the Zimmerman telegram?
No, I don't.
Uh, the U.S. the World War One broke out in 1914, and the U.S. stayed out of it
Hmm.
and didn't get involved till 1917. We said that's the European war. Why would we want to get involved?
Hmm.
Uh, and of course, everybody was trying to influence the United States. And this again is well documented history. A German official, foreign secretary or somebody like that, named Zimmerman, who was not Jewish, sent a telegram, true story, to the Mexicans, promising them support if they attacked the United States. So that, which remember, the Mexicans had been destroyed, and two-thirds of the territory of Mexico had been taken over by the United States in what we called the Mexican War. And in 1916-17, you had a revolutionary regime in much of Mexico, and Pancho Villa, uh, who made who became the subject of many movies as the rebel that, if I recall, actually did invade the United States
Hmm.
briefly at one point. The Germans promised the Mexicans support if they invaded the United States, so that the United States would be too busy
This
fighting
one
them.
particular guy, not the German government or people, but this one guy, Zimmerman.
This one guy who was a major official in the German government.
Okay.
Okay. Well, the telegraph was invented either by Morse here in the United States or by several Brits at about the same time. And all the international telegraph lines were run by the British, cable and wireless, which still controlled them until this century.
Hmm.
In fact, most of them. They intercepted that German telegram.
They being the Brits.
The Brits intercepted it,
Hmm.
let the Americans know about it, and that was one of the things that persuaded the U.S. to join World War One,
Mm.
which at that point was at a total stalemate.
Hmm.
Uh, and the Brits and the French had no hope of
Hmm.
winning.
I don't know about that. More manipulation of media. I knew about the sinking of the Lusitania. I think that was a trigger point for us to get into the war, World War One. But I had not heard about this interception of this telegram. Wow.
Yep. Yeah, that's in all the history books.
Hmm.
See, as of the sinking of the Lusitania. Now, the Germans had said that they were blockading the British Isles, and any ship going there could be bringing weapons to the British, so they were going to sink it.
Hmm.
And they proceeded to sink the Lusitania. What do you remember you learned in your history
I remember the history told us it was a passenger ship. Now, I don't know if they had some secret hold that was carrying weapons, but what I learned in history class was that it was a passenger ship and it was attacked by the Germans, and that was the reason we got into World War One.
It was a passenger ship, and something like 700 people died when it went down.
Mm.
An American neutral passenger ship,
Mm-hmm.
something that has become. Uh, I haven't looked at the original stuff on this, and this is the kind of controversial stuff I wouldn't trust if I didn't know the original data. But apparently, yes, there was a compartment loaded with weapons for the
Mm.
Brits
Wow.
on that ship. That came out in the last decade or two.
Really? Wow. Okay.
There was some evidence, and I haven't looked at it, and I don't know whether it's true
Mm-hmm.
or not.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, the first casualty of any war is the truth.
Yeah. So lying and misinformation is not new. I guess what's new is the technology has become so good at faking and creating misinformation and lies. Wow. Dave, we're going to have to take a break. We're about halfway into our show here.
Okay, lots more, a little bit more on this story. And did you see the news in the Wall Street Journal about Elon Musk?
Yeah, something about some drug problem, but let's hold off on that when we come back. This is
Okay.
Community and Technology on WACR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after a brief musical break. Okay, we're back. Community and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on WHR 90.3 FM. Before the break, you had mentioned something about Elon Musk and a breaking story. Dave, what's going on?
The Wall Street Journal reported that Elon Musk has been taking many illegal drugs, and they had plenty of evidence to suggest that they were reporting accurately. Uh, so there definitely is an allegation about Elon Musk there and a lot more. Let's go back to the story we had just before the break. We were talking about how the first enemy, the first casualty of any war is the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's certainly was true in World War One and World War Two. We gave some examples earlier in the show from World War One. Although in that case, they were true. One of them was a true example. One of the pieces of propaganda that was essential to get the U.S. into the war was that the Lusitania was a neutral ship with passengers and no weapons. And apparently, there's become evidence in the last decade or two that there were, in fact, weapons on the ship that was sunk by the Germans and had a lot to do with the U.S. getting involved in that war.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens in wartime. There are two wars going on right now that are getting attention. There's more than that. There's a war in the Sudan that's virtually uncovered.
Yeah, it's war in the East, war in the West. I mean, it's all over.
Well, it's all over, but some wars get noticed here and some
Yeah,
don't.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. When the war is in the Ukraine, that's getting a $117 billion tentative appropriation that's being fought over in Congress right now.
Mm-hmm.
$117 billion for Israel and the Ukraine. And there's a reason why money is going there that isn't going to the war in Sudan. But we know what that reason is, and so on. But it got a really dramatic story that just came across this morning. According to Reporters Sans Frontiers, a respected French group, there are 34 Palestinian journalists in Israeli prisons right now, most of whom aren't even charged.
Wow.
The Israeli war law that goes back to the British mandate allow them to put anybody in jail they think might commit a crime and hold them for 6 months.
Anyone
And
who might commit a crime, not who has committed a crime or suspected of committing a crime, but anyone who might commit a crime. That's a pretty wide canvas.
Palestine was a British colony,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the kind of thing Brits did in their colony. And apparently, not apparently, I'm sure the report is in general reliable. Slews of Palestinian journalists, mostly from the West Bank, have been put in jail incommunicado. The families can't get in touch with them by the Israelis now. So if you're hearing any report of what's happening in the West Bank and Jerusalem, recognize that most of the journalists who might have seen it one way are not in a position to tell you that part of the story.
Mm.
Even more dramatically, of course, 80 journalists have been killed in Gaza.
Mm.
There's close to 30,000 have been killed in Gaza.
30,000 people. Mm-hmm.
Well, there's some folks that don't think they're people. They think they're Palestinians.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they couldn't be killing so many.
Yeah, that makes it easy to get rid of, dehumanize. Yep. We know that story.
Yeah.
But you said 80 journalists killed in addition to the 34 that are locked up. That's the point of the story here.
Yeah, and I don't know how many of those were killed deliberately by the troops and how many just in the bombing that has killed close to 30,000 people, including about 1,000 in the last week, despite a world court judgment that ordered the Israelis to avoid genocide. Nobody listening to this is going to have their opinion changed by whatever I say, factually or not. And I know that. So let's not go there. We're a technical thing. But we can talk about the accuracy of journalism. And that's what we're.
Yeah. We're talking about truth and truth telling and how technology impacts that. And certainly the locking up and killing of journalists has an incredible impact on stories that are told or not told. So that's a big. What was the name of the French outlet that published that story, Dave, about the
I'm mispronouncing it. It translates as Reporters Without Borders. It's modeled on Doctors Without Borders,
okay.
which has been reporting for many years around the world about what's happening to journalists.
Mm-hmm.
How
Mm-hmm.
many are dying? The number in Mexico is also horrifying.
Mm.
Dozens
In Mexico.
in Mexico because
Mm-hmm.
they reported about the drug war.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I'm very lucky to be in the United States where I can say some things that would get me killed
Mm-hmm.
in places on this
Yeah,
world.
yeah, yeah. Folks, kind of, we Americans, many of us don't understand the real import of freedom of speech and what that means. But when you look around the world and see what happens to certain journalists and other folks that speak out, it really kind of brings it home how important that is. Yeah. So now, Dave, let's switch gears a little bit. You had mentioned a little something about what's going on with the Twitter guy, Elon Musk, and I know earlier you made reference to the fact that they're not monitoring some of the possible deep fake activity as much as they should, as much as someplace like Facebook is. But what else is going on with that platform and with Musk that might be worthy of discussion?
Okay. The Wall Street Journal had a remarkable article about Elon Musk, who is believed to be the richest man on earth at this point, worth enough money to buy and sell many governments out there, and very active personally and with his friends in American politics. Two things about Elon Musk. The dramatic story is that they had numerous witnesses, all anonymous, that said he was a heavy user of illegal drugs.
Mm,
They had many particular details, which is the kind of thing that convinces you the story is right. And the Wall Street Journal, like the New York Times, tends to be very strict on reporting something like this from anonymous sources, that they would have the editors check with the sources, not just the reporters, because that kind of thing you have to be very careful with. The journal story is almost certainly correct in its main claims. How much drug use does Musk have? Well, according to the journal, it said they had multiple sources. His close friend, Larry Ellison, who owns Oracle and is a mega billionaire, offered to let Musk stay on the island that he owned in order to dry out.
mm,
Now, I know nothing beyond, well, I know nothing about Musk personally beyond what's in the journal article. The journal article strongly suggests that this guy, who, among other things, controls SpaceX, which is sending up most of the US satellites these days,
hmm
military satellites, and uh, sends the astronauts to the space station and so on. And that if he is heavily using drugs,
And don't forget, has his hand on the throttle at what used to be called Twitter, which is now X. I mean, that's what a heck of a international communications platform that this guy controls.
yep, it's close to a monopoly outside of China.
Hmm
China has Weibo. China's China has been, well, China, and to a lesser extent Korea, to a lesser extent Russia, uh, have been the only countries that have avoided American total domination of the internet. Google is 90% of the searches in Europe. Uh, Twitter has no competition in most of the world, and so on. Enormously powerful, massive market power, massive political power. Second part of the story on Musk is that a few years ago, the board of directors of SpaceX, no, Tesla,
Tesla.
Tesla,
Hmm.
Tesla, the car company that he has control of, gave him a set of options that kicked in if the company was very successful. And as we know, the company, and it was based on the stock price.
Hmm.
The company is not making that much money. Stock price is off the wall. And when the stock price went from not that much up to $1 trillion, which it was within the last
Hmm.
year,
That'll be the company valuation.
that was the stock market valuation, not the
Hmm.
profits,
Right, right,
not the
right.
earnings.
Just based on the stock price.
Yeah, the earnings are a few percent of this.
Hmm.
Let me do it. Let me do a calculation in my
Hmm.
head. The earnings were less than one. The Twitter's earnings are less than 1% of the stock price.
Hmm.
They judge it on the stock price, and the bonus is kicked in $50 billion worth of stock options.
Wow. Did you say 50 billion, Dave?
Right. So usually we get I remember a story about how ridiculous it was when the AT&T, this was 20 years ago when they didn't pay people quite that much, had a $15 million of options for the CEO, and that was considered outrageous. $50 billion, that's very well documented. That's in public documents. And what the journal did is it went back and said, who is on the board of Tesla that gave him that kind of money? And what were the ties? Well, $17 billion investment by one board member, Larry Ellison,
Mm-hmm.
or, or in his companies, uh, a close to $1 billion in options, uh, half of which have not yet been exercised, to the board chairwoman, who was not a rich woman.
Mm-hmm.
She had been the CFO of an Australian phone company, so she was affluent, but not
Wealthy.
much
Mm-hmm.
less a, $1 billion.
Mm-hmm.
A slew of other connections to the other board members who gave Tesla the most, all of whom claimed they were impartial, independent directors,
Mm-hmm.
all of whom had, as we're noting, millions and millions, literally billions of dollars of compromise.
Wow.
Now, usually the courts don't touch this kind of thing. In this case, the judge in Delaware, where Tesla was incorporated, threw out his bonus, ordered it to be rescinded, and the board has to figure out what to do and what's going to happen.
Wow. This is something that just happened, right, Dave?
This just happened within the last week.
Mm-hmm.
And the evidence in the journal was devastating. In addition to which, the journal reported that several of the board members were routinely taking drugs with
What?
Musk,
Get out of here.
illegal drugs.
That was in the journal.
That's what the parties were. They
Wow.
talked about parties in Cabo that they said they had eyewitnesses at.
Mm-hmm.
to drugs being used both by Musk and by his independent board directors.
Mm.
Uh, and it's a remarkable story, both in how much they found, what was there, and the fact that the Wall Street Journal is owned by the Murdoch family.
Yeah.
One of the board directors was one of the Murdoch kids.
But one of the Murdoch kids is on the Tesla board?
Yep.
Wow.
And
Wow.
the journal went ahead with that
And
story,
ran the story anyway. Wow.
which is the kind of thing that gets careers destroyed quietly.
Mm-hmm.
Murdoch kids, unlike their daddy, have a little bit of discretion in how they do things. So they wouldn't fire the journal editor the next day. They'll discover a problem with him a year from now, probably. Which is the way these things.
Predicted here on Community and Technology by Dave Burstein. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah. And the only things I've said about Musk, his board, and so on are what I read in the story in the Wall Street Journal.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trusting the journal did the due diligence, and this is true. Now, when I was in elementary school, one of the great moments of US history goes back to 1754, when when a jury determined, remember this is when the states of what's now the US were not united, they were just
Mm-hmm.
British colonies,
Mm-hmm.
and came to the conclusion that it is not libel if it is true. That was a historic break in British and ultimately American jurisprudence. Until that point, if you said something about the king, whether or not it was true,
Mm-hmm.
didn't matter.
Where did this court decision take place, Dave? It was in the colonies?
It
In
was
one
in
of the
New York.
states?
Yep, John Peter Zenger
Mm-hmm.
case that was so important. I learned about it in elementary school.
Hmm. Wow.
Uh, and it established for British common law the principle that truth is a defense for libel.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have once, yeah, I can tell the story now. 20 years ago, I broke a remarkable story just on this kind of conflict. AT&T, which at that point was SBC, bought from one of its board members, Carlos Slim, the head of Telemex, at one point the richest man in the world. The
Oh,
company,
Carlos Slim. Yeah, I remember him. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had an interesting chat with him one day. Uh, Quite remarkable. The And quite intelligent. And, he was absolutely to the point. In fact, we'll tell that story if we have enough time in this show. But let's finish the thing here.
Yeah, we just got a couple minutes, Dave, so we're kind of winding
Okay.
down here.
They had bought Prodigy, a company that was owned by Slim and Telemex, for what was, in my opinion, $100 million above the fair market value
Hmm.
from their board member.
Mm-hmm.
I had that story. I was trying to be very careful, so I sent the facts over AT&T, which were, where I learned how these professionals do these things. The first thing was they asked me, "Is there anything we can do to help you?"
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
And if I wanted a $500,000 travel grant for me to do some research on broadband in South Africa, which at that point the South African phone company was controlled by AT&T,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure they would have been happy to give it to me. if I killed
Wow.
my story.
Wow.
And when that didn't work on me, and maybe I should have taken the money while it was there. Money is something, it's hard. This is a hard country to be poor in your old age. I didn't take the money in any case. Uh, and I turned down a couple of things like that over the years. This was the most dramatic. They talked to me about how they thought that my reporting was inaccurate, non factual, and reckless.
Mm-hmm.
Reckless was the key word because reckless in a journalist makes you vulnerable to a libel case.
Mm-hmm.
And there was every reason for me to believe that they were willing to spend $10 million bringing a libel case against me that would bankrupt me just defending it, even though my story was good.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to say something that I had. So I reported about 3 years at that point that I was ready with. I thought sooner or later I would have a chance to say it. This was the only time. No, I had two other times I've used it where I understand that in the United States, truth is a defense for libel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happened in that is that I fed the story to Simon Romero at the Times. The Times had enough lawyers; they went with the story. I was going to go with it a few days later, but let them
Yeah,
come
need a
around.
little cover.
And when the Times reported it, AT&T promptly shut up and didn't do anything when I also reported it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Wow.
but that's the kind of way these things happen in the
Mm-hmm.
world very often.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Well, that's some
and
story, Dave.
let me go to Musk because we're about to run out of time.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment, Elon Musk is supporting a suit by a actor, actress who was fired by Disney from The Mandalorian, the very popular science fiction show, for saying some things that Disney publicly said were absolutely offensive to everything the company stands for. And shortly thereafter, they fired her.
Mm-hmm.
They had to do with some of her things she said on Twitter
Mm-hmm.
about gay people
Mm-hmm.
and were clearly offensive to me and to the heads of Disney. She has just gone to court with her lawyers being paid by Twitter and Musk
Mm-hmm.
to get reinstated and to get damages for being fired because she exercised her free speech in saying something that I would consider hateful about gay people. Musk is funding that case. It's going to probably cost Disney a few $1 million to defend it because it's the kind of case that is not an you have to defend really effectively
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that is what Musk and his friends are willing to do to protect their points of view.
Wow.
Okay, so quite some stories this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the focus today has been truth telling and how technology in particular is able to manipulate and mask and just kind of pull the wool over our eyes of something that's been happening probably since time immemorial by government and powers that be. But the tools have gotten so sophisticated today that it's getting
So
harder and harder.
sophisticated tools. It's tools that are so unsophisticated that a high school kid with his
Okay.
hands.
Well, they're accessible. They're still pretty sophisticated, but they're accessible. You're right, Dave. Accessible and able to be used by just semi-tech savvy folks. That's In a way, that makes it even more scary, and that these tools can be used by so many folks. But Dave, we're going to have to leave it there for now. A subject that I'm sure we're going to revisit, given its important impact on society here in the U.S. And across the globe, for that matter.
And we didn't even get to the story about how AI is being used by both the Russians and the Ukrainians very heavily, and how the US is right in the middle of it.
Mm.
That'll be another story.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dave. It's been Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM. Every Wednesday, 5 p.m. Tune in. Just might learn something. Thanks. Good night.